The night in Eldridge Point deepened, a black velvet curtain drawn across the world, obscuring the line between reality and nightmare. The celestial event, the apex of the villagers' dread, had begun. In the sky, the stars seemed to pulse with a malevolent intent, aligning in a configuration that felt unnatural, a cosmic pattern that defied all laws of astronomy and physics. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed, along with the handful of villagers still clinging to their sanity, huddled inside the police station. The building, once a bastion of safety and order, now felt like a fragile shell, vulnerable to the unspeakable horrors lurking outside. As the alignment progressed, the air itself began to thrum with a palpable energy, a vibration that resonated in the very bones of those who felt it. It was as though the fabric of reality was being twisted, stretched thin by the celestial forces at play. Then, it happened. A sound, low and resonant, emanated from the heavens, a cosmic dirge that heralded the arrival of something ancient and terrifying. The villagers inside the station clutched at their ears, their eyes wide with terror, as the sound seemed to bore into their minds, planting seeds of madness. Outside, the world had transformed. The streets of Eldridge Point were bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light, a luminescence that cast no shadows but instead seemed to swallow the darkness whole. It was in this surreal landscape that the entity made its presence known. It was a specter of impossible geometry, a swirling mass of darkness and light that defied comprehension. Its form was ever-changing, a nightmare made manifest, its very presence an affront to all that was natural and sane. The entity moved through the streets with a slow, deliberate grace, a predator stalking its prey. Wherever it passed, the fabric of reality seemed to warp, the buildings bending and twisting in impossible angles, the ground undulating like the surface of a troubled sea. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed watched in horror from the windows of the station. They knew that they were witnessing something beyond their worst fears, a cosmic horror made flesh. Around the entity, the villagers who had been drawn outside began to change, their bodies contorted in grotesque ways, their faces stretching into masks of agony and ecstasy. They moved towards the entity in a trance-like state, drawn by a force they could not resist. Inside the station, panic erupted. Some villagers screamed, others prayed, and a few seemed to lose their grip on reality entirely, their minds shattered by the sight of the cosmic horror outside. Alex felt a cold hand of fear grip their heart. They knew that they were out of their depth, facing a force that was not just physically destructive, but capable of tearing apart the very fabric of their minds. Ava, her face pale and her eyes haunted, clutched at Alex's arm. "It's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The thing from my visions. It's come to claim us all." Inspector Reed, his face a mask of grim determination, rallied the remaining villagers. "We can't let it break us," he shouted over the din. "We have to stand together to fight this thing, whatever it is." But even as he spoke, the entity continued its slow, inexorable march through the village, its presence a blight upon the world. The celestial alignment had begun, and with it, the true horror of what lay beyond the stars was unleashed upon Eldridge Point, in the police station, amidst the cries of terror and despair. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed prepared to face the nightmare that had descended upon them, knowing that their battle was not just for their lives, but for their very souls. The entity's passage through Eldridge Point left a trail of altered reality in its wake. The village, once familiar and comforting, now resembled a nightmarish landscape from one of Eva's distorted paintings. Buildings twisted upon themselves in impossible contortions, streets looped and curled like serpents, and the very air pulsed with an otherworldly energy. In the police station, The group grappled with the rapidly deteriorating situation. Alex, their mind racing for a scientific explanation, felt overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of it all. Eva, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline, sketched frantically, her drawings becoming more frenzied and abstract. Inspector Reed attempted to maintain a facade of order, but the fear in his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. He had faced down criminals in danger before, but nothing could have prepared him for this. As they strategized, a loud splintering crack echoed outside, drawing their attention to the window. The sight that met their eyes was beyond comprehension. The road in front of the station had split open, revealing a gaping maw that seemed to lead into an abyss. From this chasm, a dense black mist seeped out, swirling and coalescing into forms both grotesque and terrifying. Shadowy figures emerged from the mist, their bodies warped and elongated, moving with a jerky, unnatural motion. They let out wails that sounded like the cries of the damned, a cacophony that sent shivers down the spines of everyone in the station. The alignment. It's tearing the veil between worlds, Alex muttered, a realization dawning in their terror-stricken mind. We're seeing into another dimension, another reality. Eva's hand trembled as she sketched the scene, her eyes wide with horror. It's like my dreams, she whispered. The nightmares I've been having, they were premonitions. Inspector Reed rallied the remaining villagers, barricading the doors and windows with whatever furniture they could find. But as the otherworldly mist seeped through the cracks and crevices of the building, it became clear that physical barriers would not hold back the horrors that were descending upon them. The mist inside the station took on a life of its own, forming into spectral shapes that whispered of madness and despair. Villagers screamed and cowered, some succumbing to the terror and fainting, while others tried futilely to fight off the intangible assailants. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed found themselves back to back in the center of the room, desperately trying to maintain a semblance of sanity in the face of the unspeakable. Outside, the village had become a labyrinth of horror, a twisted reflection of its former self. Governed by the malevolent will of the entity and the cosmic forces it unleashed, the night wore on, an endless parade of terror and madness. The boundaries of reality continued to warp and fray, the very fabric of existence seeming to unravel at the seams. Eldridge Point, caught in the grip of the celestial alignment, was no longer a part of the world they knew. In the twisted reality that Eldridge Point had become, time seemed to warp and stretch. The night lingered, as if reluctant to release the village from its otherworldly grip. Inside the police station, the survivors huddled together, surrounded by the echoing whispers and cries of the abyss that had invaded their world. Alex, their mind a whirlwind of fear and scientific curiosity, tried to piece together the chaotic events. The celestial alignment, the experiment at the observatory, Eva's nightmarish visions. It all pointed to a thinning of the barriers between realities, an intrusion of a malevolent cosmic entity into their world. Eva, her eyes hollow from terror and exhaustion, continued to sketch the horrors that besieged them. Her latest drawings were more abstract, a chaotic blend of dark shapes and swirling forms that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. "They're getting stronger," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of otherworldly wails. "The visions, they're not just visions anymore, they're windows, portals to somewhere else." Inspector Reed, his face etched with grim determination, kept watch at a barricaded window. The once familiar streets of Eldridge Point were now a labyrinth of nightmares, each twist and turn revealing a new horror. Shadowy figures roamed the mist, their wails a constant reminder of the terror just beyond the walls. As the night progressed, a new, more terrifying phenomenon began to manifest. The very walls of the station seemed to pulse and breathe, the structure warping as if under immense pressure from an unseen force. Cracks appeared in the ceiling and walls, oozing a thick black substance that defied physics, crawling against gravity and emitting a low, menacing hum. The survivors recoiled in horror as the substance began to take shape, forming into grotesque, tentacle-like appendages that reached out towards them with an insidious intent. Panic erupted within the station, the fragile semblance of order collapsing into chaos. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed fought to maintain a perimeter, using whatever tools and weapons they could find, but it was becoming increasingly clear that their efforts were in vain. The entity, the cosmic horror that had descended upon Eldridge Point, was not just an external threat. It was an infection, spreading its malevolent influence through the very fabric of their reality. Amidst the chaos, a villager's scream rose above the rest, a sound so filled with terror and pain that it silenced the room. The man was convulsing, his body contorting in unnatural ways as the black substance enveloped him, his eyes turning pitch black as he let out a final guttural cry that seemed to come from another world. The sight of the transformation was too much for some. Madness took hold, the thin veneer of sanity shattered by the relentless assault of cosmic horror. Some villagers fled into the night, preferring to face the unknown terrors outside than the nightmare within. As the entity's influence grew stronger, reality itself began to unravel at an alarming pace. The station, the village, the very earth they stood on seemed to be dissolving into an abyss of madness and despair. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed found themselves fighting not just for survival, but for their very minds, as the whispers of the abyss echoed around them, promising an end to their suffering, an end to their sanity. In the heart of Eldridge Point, under the malevolent gaze of the aligned stars, the echoes of the abyss beckoned them to succumb to the darkness. The night in Eldridge Point had stretched into an eternity, a canvas upon which the most nightmarish of scenes were painted. The celestial alignment reached its zenith, its cosmic energy tearing at the very fabric of reality. The veil between worlds, once a sturdy barrier, now lay in tatters, allowing the unspeakable horrors of the abyss to seep into the world. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed, along with the few remaining survivors in the police station, found themselves in a reality that was fracturing around them. The building creaked and groaned under the strain of the otherworldly forces, its walls buckling as if in agony. Outside the village was a grotesque mockery of its former self. The streets had become shifting, malleable paths that led to impossible geometries. Buildings melted and reformed, their structures defying logic, windows and doors appearing and disappearing, leading to nowhere, or perhaps to somewhere far worse. The air was filled with the sounds of the other, worldly invasion. The guttural roars of unseen beasts, the haunting wails of specters, and the constant maddening whispers that seemed to emanate from the very ether. The sky, a swirling vortex of dark colors, pulsed with the malevolent energy of the alignment. In the midst of this chaos, the survivors witnessed manifestations that chilled them to their core. From the fractured veil emerged creatures of nightmare, beings with too many eyes or too many limbs, their forms fluid and ever-changing, as if they were not bound by the laws of physics or biology. One such creature, a mass of tentacles and eyes, slithered its way down the main street, its presence causing the ground to warp and heave. The sight of it caused a primal fear in the survivors, a terror so profound it threatened to overwhelm their remaining sanity. Inside the station, the situation grew increasingly desperate. The black, tar-like substance that had started seeping through the cracks was now a deluge flooding the floor and crawling up the walls. It pulsed with a malevolent life, reaching out with sinewy tendrils towards the petrified villagers. Eva, her face a mask of terror and fascination, continued to sketch the horrors they faced, her hand moving almost of its own accord. Her drawings were no longer mere images on paper. They seemed to move, to pulsate with the same malevolent energy that filled the room. "We need to get out of here," Inspector Reed shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of the collapsing reality. "We need to find a way to close the rift, to stop this madness." But even as he spoke, the station began to collapse around them, the structure unable to withstand the otherworldly forces. With a deafening crack, the ceiling gave way, revealing the chaotic sky above, a vortex of darkness and light that seemed to reach down for them. In a frantic, desperate effort, the survivors fled the disintegrating building, spilling out into the twisted streets of Eldridge Point. The village was unrecognizably a landscape of horror that defied comprehension. As they navigated the shifting terrain, dodging the grotesque creatures that roamed the streets, Alex's mind raced. There had to be a way to reverse the alignment, to repair the fractured veil. But how could they, mere humans, hope to stand against the might of cosmic forces that had existed since time immemorial? The answer, Alex realized with a sinking heart, might lie with Eva and her unsettling connection to the abyss. But the cost of such a solution, they feared, would be more than any of them were prepared to pay. In the heart of the fractured reality that Eldridge Point had become, the survivors faced not just a battle for their lives, but a battle for the very soul of their world. The once quaint and serene village of Eldridge Point had transformed into an otherworldly battlefield, a place where the very laws of nature seemed to have been suspended. The survivors, led by Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed, navigated the labyrinthine streets which now twisted and undulated like the coils of some massive unseen serpent. The air was thick with a cacophony of unnatural sounds, the guttural growls of unseen entities, the sorrowful moans of the damned, and the ever-present maddening whispers that seemed to seep from the very cracks in the fractured reality. The sky above was a swirling maelstrom, a chaotic blend of darkness and eerie light that cast an otherworldly pall over the devastated village. As they moved, the ground beneath them heaved and buckled, making their progress perilous. Buildings loomed over them, their structures grotesquely warped, windows and doors appearing like gaping maws and leering eyes. The very air seemed to pulsate with an oppressive energy, pressing down on them with an almost physical force. Suddenly, from the shifting shadows, a horde of nightmarish creatures emerged, their forms so bizarre and terrifying that they defied description. Some slithered on a multitude of legs, others floated in the air, surrounded by a halo of writhing tendrils. Their eyes, if they had them, glowed with a malevolent intelligence. The group fought desperately, using whatever weapons they had: makeshift clubs, fire pokers, even their own fists. In a futile attempt to fend off the onslaught, each blow they landed seemed to pass through the creatures, as if they were battling smoke and shadow. In the midst of the chaos, Eva's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She moved as if in a trance, her eyes unfocused, mumbling to herself in a language that sounded both ancient and otherworldly. Her sketches, clutched tightly in her hands, seemed to pulsate with the same malevolent energy as the creatures that surrounded them. Alex realized with a sinking heart that Eva was their key to ending this nightmare. Her connection to the abyss, the visions that had plagued her, they were all part of this cosmic puzzle. But how to use that connection without succumbing to the madness that enveloped them was a question that chilled them to the bone. Inspector Reed, his face a mask of grim determination, ushered the group through the nightmare landscape. His voice a steady beacon in the chaos. "Stay together," he shouted. "We need to reach the observatory. It's our only chance." The observatory, once a place of scientific pursuit, now stood as their last bastion of hope. If they could reach it, perhaps they could find a way to reverse the alignment, to close the rift that had torn their world asunder. But the path to the observatory was fraught with danger. The village itself seemed to be against them, its streets twisting into impossible mazes, its buildings collapsing around them in showers of debris. And always, the creatures were there, a relentless tide of horror that sought to overwhelm them, to drag them into the abyss from which they had sprung. As they fought their way through the nightmarish landscape, each step became a battle for their sanity, a struggle to maintain a grip on the reality that was slipping away from them. The village of Eldridge Point, under the malign influence of the celestial alignment, had become a place where the boundaries between worlds blurred, where the horrors of the abyss walked the earth. And in this battle for reality, Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed faced not just the external threat of the creatures and the collapsing world around them, but the internal threat of their own minds, teetering on the brink of madness. The survivors' journey to the observatory was a descent into an ever-deepening nightmare. The village of Eldridge Point, now a grotesque canvas of cosmic horror, writhed under the influence of the celestial alignment. The sky above churned with unspeakable colors, painting the surreal landscape in hues of madness. Alex, Eva, and Inspector Reed led the beleaguered group through the distorted streets, their path a labyrinth of terror. The very ground beneath them seemed alive, undulating and shifting, trying to thwart their progress. Buildings twisted into sinister shapes loomed over them, their windows like glaring eyes, and their doors gaping maws ready to swallow them whole. The air was thick with the screams of the creatures that stalked them, echoes of a reality torn asunder. These beings, born from the abyss, were nightmarish amalgamations of limbs and eyes, mouths and claws, existing in a state of constant horrific metamorphosis. In the midst of this chaos, Eva's connection to the other worldly forces grew stronger. Her eyes glowed with an eerie light, and her words were a mix of prophecy and madness. The sketches in her hands writhed as if alive, mirroring the hellish landscape around them. As they neared the observatory, a massive creature blocked their path. It was a thing of nightmares, a colossal mass of tentacles and eyes, its body a shifting landscape of horror. With a sound like the wailing of lost souls, it moved towards them, its intent clear. Alex and Inspector Reed rallied the survivors, forming a desperate defense, but their efforts were futile against the creature's might. It was Eva, in a moment of lucid clarity, who stepped forward, her sketches held high. The creature halted, its multitude of eyes fixating on the drawings. A connection, ancient and terrible, sparked between Eva and the beast. Words of power older than time spilled from her lips, her voice resonating with the force of the abyss. The air around them crackled with energy, the fabric of reality straining under the weight of her words. The creature recoiled, its form flickering, as if uncertain of its own existence. With a final, deafening cry, it dissipated into the ether, leaving behind a trail of shimmering dark mist. The path to the observatory now clear, the group hurried forward, their hope renewed. Inside, the building was a shell of its former self, the instruments and equipment twisted and ruined by the otherworldly forces. But Alex had a plan. Using the remnants of Dr. Rowan's research and the bizarre properties of the altered reality, they devised a desperate gambit to sever the connection between the stars and Eldridge Point. As the celestial alignment reached its peak, the survivors worked frantically. Eva, her mind a conduit to the abyss, channeled the otherworldly energy, her sketches serving as a focus for their efforts. Inspector Reed and the others fortified the observatory, preparing for the backlash of their actions. Alex, at the heart of it all, initiated the process. A surge of energy, raw and untamed, coursed through the observatory. The building shook to its foundations, the air alive with the sound of a reality tearing apart. Outside, the sky erupted in a display of eldritch light. The stars, the harbingers of this nightmare, seemed to scream in protest. The fabric of reality, stretched and torn, began to knit itself back together. The nightmare landscape of Eldridge Point receding like a bad dream upon waking. But the cost was high. The energy unleashed was too much for Eva. She collapsed, her eyes dimming as the last of the otherworldly light left them. The sketches in her hand crumbled to dust. Their purpose served. As the survivors gathered around her, offering their thanks and mourning their losses, Alex looked up at the sky. The stars were returning to their normal positions, the cosmic alignment ending. But the experience had changed them all. They had faced the horrors of the abyss and survived. Eldritch Point would heal, but the scars of this night would remain, a reminder of the time when the stars aligned and reality itself was severed. As dawn broke over Eldritch Point, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the remnants of darkness, casting light upon a village forever altered. The celestial alignment had ended, but its effects lingered in the air, an ethereal reminder of the night's horrors. The survivors, among them Alex, Inspector Reed, and the few villagers who had withstood the night's madness, emerged from the observatory into a world that was both familiar and irrevocably changed. The streets, once twisted into nightmarish forms, now lay quiet and still, their normalcy almost as jarring as the previous night's chaos. Buildings that had loomed like malevolent giants were now just buildings, their sinister animations gone. The ground was littered with debris, remnants of the battle between realities. In the light of day, the village of Eldridge Point looked wounded, a community that had faced the unthinkable and survived. In the center of it all lay Eva, her life ebbing away. The energy she had channeled to sever the stars' connection had taken its toll. Her once vibrant eyes, which had seen into the abyss, were now dimmed, gazing up at the sky she had saved. As Alex and the others gathered around her, she offered a weak smile. "I saw them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The stars, they were so beautiful, even as they screamed." With those final words, she exhaled for the last time, her spirit departing the world she had helped save. Inspector Reed, his face a canvas of grief and relief, looked around at the survivors. "We'll need to rebuild," he said, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "Not just our homes, but our lives. What happened here, it will be with us forever." As the villagers began the slow process of recovery, Alex wandered through the streets, their mind a tumult of emotions. They had witnessed the impossible, had seen the fabric of reality torn asunder. The scientist in them struggled to rationalize the experience, while the human in them mourned the loss and terror of it all. In the following days, Eldridge Point became a hive of activity. News crews and authorities arrived, their presence a stark contrast to the village's recent isolation. Stories were told, some true, others embellished, but none could truly capture the nightmare they had lived through. Alex found themselves drawn back to the observatory, to the place where it had all begun. Standing amidst the ruined equipment, they looked up at the sky. Now just a sky. Its stars no longer a source of terror but of wonder. But the experience had left its mark. Alex knew that the universe was far vaster and more mysterious than they had ever imagined. The abyss had been closed, but its echo remained, a whisper in their dreams, a shadow at the edge of their vision. Eldridge Point would heal its scars hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy, but for those who had survived the alignment, the world would never be the same. They had looked into the abyss, had faced the cosmic horror beyond the stars, and had emerged changed, forever aware of the thinness of the veil that separated their reality from the horrors that lurked in the unknown. In the aftermath, as life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, Alex realized that their journey was not over. It had only just begun, for in the vast unexplored reaches of the universe, there were surely other secrets, other horrors waiting to be discovered, and Alex, with a mix of fear and awe, knew that their quest for understanding, for uncovering the mysteries of the cosmos, would be a lifelong pursuit.